Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between to the Movie Script channel. I'm your host, Charlie, and today I'm going to give you the Gen X recommendations of all the new movies that have come out into the top streaming platforms that you have listed over here. Now, I decided to cover these 4 streaming services because I feel like these always have the most movies at the beginning of every month. Now, if you've subscribed to most of these streaming services, you know that they're kind of on a rotation where these movies just move from one streaming service to the other. Either way, sometimes a new movie will come up that hasn't been on any of these streaming services. I'm going to recommend the older movies usually from the 90s, early 2000s, and I will recommend some newer movies that I feel Gen Xers like me really appreciate, really just love for that old school feel. But most of these movies are just old school movies that people like me, they're action junkies. We grew up with directors like Michael Bay before Transformers and Ridley Scott and James Cameron when he was doing Terminator. So I wanted to build out this list to kind of give you an idea of the movies that I really enjoy. I also want to do this at the beginning of every month when the new movies come out, but I came out with this idea just now, and so I decided to do it mid-month. Although sometimes they do put movies out mid-month or they'll put movies out every week, so I can do this in the middle of the month, but we'll see. It depends on how much content there is. Without further ado, let's get to my list. Now, before I get to my list, I do want to say that there's going to be chapters included. I've separated these movies into genre. Now, I didn't include all the genres. All I've included is action, comedy, sci-fi and fantasy, and horror. If I feel like there's a movie that's worthy of attention that's outside of those genres, I'll either mention them at the end or I'll throw them in a genre where they kind of fit because, there's a lot of action comedies, there's a lot of action dramas. You get the idea. Now, we're going to start with action as our first genre, and I'm going to go down the list. So the first movie I have on my list is from Netflix, and that is Black Hawk Down. If you haven't seen this movie and you're an action junkie, you are in for a treat. This is a fantastic film. It's directed by Ridley Scott, co-produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. So the film is based off a book, and it's basically about a United States military raid in Mogadishu that went bad. A Black Hawk helicopter went down, and then they send in a team of special forces to retrieve the fallen soldiers. Now, you've got a cast here of Josh Hartnett, Ewan McGregor, Eric Bana, Tom Sizemore, William Fitcher, I don't know who that is either, Jason Isaacs, Sam Shepard, Jeremy Piven, which is insane, Hugh Dancy, and Tom Hardy in his first film role. Also, Orlando Bloom, Ty Burrell, and Nicholas Coster-Waldau. He's the guy from Game of Thrones. Can you believe that? This is such a great cast, great director, great screenplay, really good action scenes, none of that CGI crap, and phenomenal acting, great drama. There's some really emotional moments, especially if you're a former soldier like myself. The way World War II veterans felt about Saving Private Ryan is the way that soldiers like myself feel about this movie. And it's just an all-around fantastic movie. Highly recommend if you haven't watched it. Black Hawk Down, 2002. The next movie on my list is still from Netflix, and I wanted to mention this movie because it's not entirely an action movie, but the movie is Léon the Professional, 1994 film, French action thriller written and directed by Luc Besson. It stars Jean Reno and Gary Oldman, who does an incredible performance in this film. If you haven't watched it yet, I can't wait till you see Gary Oldman. Like, he just shines in his role. And you've also got the film debut of Natalie Portman. She's a little girl. Calm down, you little perverts. The plot centers around Léon, which is a professional hitman. He has a neighbor who's Natalie Portman. She witnesses her parents get killed by a corrupt DEA agent, played by Gary Oldman. And Léon decides to take her in. He makes her a protege, and they move on from the place until eventually Gary Oldman tracks them down, and then he goes after them. And I won't explain anymore because there's a phenomenal action piece at the end of the film. Now, I do want to say that this isn't a pure action film. There's a lot of downtime in the movie, but it is a well-crafted, well-acted movie. and you're definitely going to enjoy it. So, highly recommend Léon the Professional. Now, moving over to the Hulu side, we have Speed. Now, I know many of us have already watched Speed, but those of you who haven't, you are in for a ride. You've got America's sweetheart, Keanu Reeves. You've got America's sweetheart, Sandra Bullock. They've got this chemistry that is just mwah. But not just that, the action, the tense scenes. Again, no CGI. Oh man, these are the movies that you really are going to enjoy because they are just old school, hardcore action movies. There's no hidden agenda in them. There's no ridiculous tie-ins to other movies. It's just a great movie with great actors and a great director. So the main plot of Speed revolves around the terrorist who has planted a bomb on a bus. Basically, if this bus goes under 50 miles an hour, the bus explodes, unless they meet the terrorist demands. And you have Sandra Bullock. She's actually not the bus driver, but she ends up taking over after something happens to the bus driver. I won't go into very much detail. And then also you have Keanu Reeves, who's kind of like a SWAT anti-terrorism officer, and he joins in on the fun. You've got the romantic chemistry between the two. You've got amazing action set pieces. You're going to absolutely enjoy Speed if you haven't watched it. And then if you're like me and you're bored and you don't want to really watch anything new, you got to go back into Speed. It definitely holds up even in this day and age. I mean, obviously not everything holds up in the movie, but most of it definitely holds up. On to our next streaming service, Amazon Prime. So before I mention the movie for Amazon Prime, there's a couple of honorable mentions that I wanted to say. These are movies that are on Amazon Prime, but are on those third-party apps within Amazon Prime that are free. So these two movies are on Freevee, so I'm assuming that they're going to have commercials, which is why I didn't want to include them entirely on my list, but I do want to mention them because they are awesome movies. So the two movies are John Wick's 1 through 3 are on Freevee, and Scarface is also on Freevee. Now onto the action movie, which would be considered kind of an action comedy. That is the 2003 film The Rundown. Now, The Rundown is a 2003 American action movie comedy. It stars Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Sean William Scott, which I know you're just kind of like, whatever happened to him? I really thought he was going to take off. And he's done a couple of movies here and there, but they've been kind of like low-budget movies. Maybe he's been blacklisted from Hollywood. It's really interesting. I don't understand why he didn't take off. I always found him hilarious. And in this movie, he's really funny, and he can play the action roles. He's got the build for it. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson plays a bounty hunter who's also determined to be a chef, and this is going to be his big score. He goes down to the jungle to chase Sean William Scott for his father, and hilarity and chaos ensues. This movie is not perfect by any means, but it's really funny. It's got some great action set pieces, and it's just an all-around fun action early 2000, late 90s type of movie. You're really going to enjoy it if you're just looking for like a schlock action buddy comedy movie. It's definitely not as strong as Lethal Weapon, but if you're looking for something in that realm, this is going to fit your bill. Plus, there's this hilarious scene with these monkeys. I'm going to see if I can find the clip and I'll post it here because it is so funny. On to my last streaming service, and that is HBO Max, or whatever the hell they're going to call themselves in a few more months. We've got Kingsman: The Secret Service. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's not an early 2000s, late 90s movie, but I will tell you this. That is a movie for Gen Xers. We love this type of movie. And Kingsman: The Secret Service, it just filled that spot for me. I remember not knowing anything about the movie and then just coming across it. I watched it and I was just blown away. I was like, where has this movie been all my life? Let me explain about Kingsman: Secret Service. It's directed by Matthew Vaughn with a screenplay by Jane Goldman and Matthew Vaughn himself. The movie is actually based off of a comic book from Mark Millar and Dave Gibbons. Basically, this film follows this British poor kid named Eggsy. His father was killed mysteriously in a war accident and he's left poor and broke. And then in his teens, he's a bit of a troublemaker. He gets in trouble with the law. He calls this number on the back of a medal that this man gave him many years ago when his father died. And it ends up being that his father was going to work for this secret spy organization that's not beholden to any governments and basically is doing good for the world, but not having to answer to any government organizations or police organizations, so they're super secret. This film was just phenomenal. I mean, great action all around, good emotional moments. I mean, the action set piece in the church alone is just amazing. I will say this, I'm sorry to interrupt myself, but Samuel L. Jackson plays a weird, quirky character. And at first, when I saw this movie, I kind of didn't like his character. I was just like, this is weird. I didn't like the lisp. But I watched the movie a couple of weeks ago again, and something just works about it. I actually enjoyed it. Even though I initially did not like Samuel L. Jackson's character, I really enjoyed it the second viewing. Kingsman: Secret Service on HBO Max. There's your action movie to watch this month. Moving on to comedy. So let's start off with Netflix. Now, we've got an older movie, 1996. It's actually directed by Ben Stiller, The Cable Guy. If you haven't seen The Cable Guy, oh man, this is Jim Carrey at his finest. And you would think that this is some type of slapstick movie, but it's pretty dark, although there are some really standout moments, specifically at medieval times, and the bathroom scene with Owen Wilson. By the way, you've got Jim Carrey, you've got Matthew Broderick, you've got Jack Black, and you've got Eric Roberts, you've got Janine Garofalo, you've got David Cross, Andy Dick, Ben Stiller himself, and Bob Odenkirk. Who doesn't love Bob Odenkirk? He's just the best. Now, the film actually centers around a crazy man who's pretending to be a cable guy because apparently towards the end they find out that he's actually not employed by the cable company, but he's basically setting up people with free cable in order to be friends with them. And it is crazy because at first it seems innocent enough, but then it just gets crazier and crazier and crazier. I think you're going to enjoy it for the fact that it's in 1996 and it was before the internet, or I guess before the internet became what it is. So you'll get to hear them talking about how pretty soon in the future you'll do all the things that basically we do now on the internet. And it's just really funny to see. It's almost like a time capsule. By the way, great performances by Owen Wilson. He plays a jerk in this movie, and he's only in the movie for like a few minutes, but it's memorable. Also, Leslie Mann is in this, and she's got that Paul Rudd thing where she doesn't age because I don't understand how old she is. She's been in a ton of movies. So the next movie is still from Netflix, and that is Last Action Hero, 1993, American fantasy action comedy film directed and produced by John McTiernan, co-written by Shane Black and David Arnott. It's basically like a satire on all the action movies that Arnold Schwarzenegger has done, like the really over-the-top action movies. And basically, this kid from real-life world where everything is shitty in New York, he goes to see this movie from his favorite star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, which stars as this guy, Jack Slater. And he's basically like an action version of himself in our life, but way more over the top. He goes to see this movie. The older man who works at the theater, who he's friends with, which is kind of weird, he gives him this magic ticket from Houdini, and basically this ticket will allow you to go to any movie that you're watching. So he's got the ticket in his pocket. He's watching the movie from Jack Slater, and then all hell starts to break loose. Stick of dynamite comes into the movie theater. He gets blown in, and then he's in the movie. Now, this is an interesting movie because when I first saw this movie, I was younger, and I enjoyed the first part of this movie, but I didn't enjoy the second part of this film. And the reason why I didn't is because I felt like it got a lot darker and it got a lot more mature, and I was just in it for the action and the comedy and the slapstick humor, and it got really dark in the second half. There was a lot of mature themes in that movie, but That's why I encourage you to watch this film, because I watched it on the second time around and it had a much better impact on me than when I watched it when I was younger. So Last Action Hero, by the way, the guy from Game of Thrones is also in Last Action Hero, and he plays the villain and he does a great job. You're really going to enjoy that one. On to Hulu. We've got Sex Drive. Now, this one's a bit controversial because, let's be honest, it's not an all-around super duper funny movie, but it's an underrated comedy. I never hear people talk about it and I never hear people do reviews on it. Sex Drive. Really funny movie. It's about this kid who's talking to a girl online, and of course he's pumped himself up. He says he's got this awesome car, and then she's like, "Oh, I want to meet you." And he goes to meet her only to find out that it's a con in order to steal his car. But hilarity ensues. They end up going to an Amish farm. All hell breaks loose. Now, the actors are kind of no name, except you got James Marsden in this film, and he plays the role of this dickhead older brother, and he plays it perfectly. Like, I see him and I'm just getting all heated up thinking about it, but he does the role flawlessly. Unfortunately, I don't think it's the unrated version that's available on Hulu. And that's a shame because I think the unrated version is a bit better. But if you haven't watched Sex Drive and you're looking for a comedy, this is one of the new ones on Hulu, so give it a shot. Now, the next film on my list is also from Hulu, and this one is truly underrated. And before I say who it stars, hold on for a minute and give it a chance. Now, this movie stars Andy Samberg, and it is Popstar, Never Stop, Never Stopping. This movie is kind of like a half musical, half comedy, half drama, and it is great. I think this film is just as underrated as Hot Rod. I don't know if you've ever seen Hot Rod, but that's another good movie. I don't know if it's on any streaming services. I'll have to check for you. But for now, on Hulu, we've got Popstar, Never Stop, Never Stopping, and some of the songs in this movie are going to just make you fall on the floor and die. They are absolutely hilarious. I was always skeptical of Andy Samberg, and then someone told me, like, look, watch Hot Rod, give it a chance. And then I did, and then I ended up really liking it. And then he came out with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and that show has exploded his career. I also liked him in Palm Springs. That's another movie that I think it's on Hulu, but I'm not sure. I have to check. So basically, the film is a mockumentary comedy starring Andy Samberg and his Lonely Island Club group, and they break up, and it's a mockumentary kind of basically showing a breakup of a pop band, but done through the hilarity of Andy Samberg. Or when you see and hear these songs, you are just going to die. But yeah, it's a 2016 film, so it's not one of the older films. But I don't know. I like to recommend this one because I really enjoyed it. I truly did. Moving on to Amazon Prime, we've got Coneheads. I thought that this movie wasn't going to hold up, but I watched it a couple of months ago and I was laughing hysterically. Now, some of the jokes are hit or miss, but the majority are hit. So Coneheads is about a family of extraterrestrials that end up landing on Earth. They got these big cone heads. It's from an SNL sketch, and it's got Dan Aykroyd as the father, Jane Curtin as the mother, and Lorraine Newman as the daughter Connie. It also has Chris Farley and a couple of SNL alums in the movie, but Chris Farley has this absolutely hilarious role in the movie. Yeah, it holds up. It's an older movie, so I mean, they're still talking about immigration in the movie, which cracks me up because we're still talking about it today. It just goes to show you that, like, nothing gets fixed. We just keep talking about the same thing over and over again. It's so stupid. Anyway, the movie is really funny. Oh, and David Spade's in it as well. I almost forgot about him. I'm sorry I did, because he actually plays another big role. Although he kind of plays his typecast role of being the sarcastic whatever person he's playing. But he's really funny in this as well. But yeah, Coneheads, that's a pretty good film. And if you haven't watched it in a while, yeah, it still holds up. It's pretty good. The final film that I'm going to recommend from Amazon Prime is Beavis and Butt-Head Do America. If you haven't watched that film, it is absolutely hilarious. Once again, I've watched it recently. It still holds up. I was cracking up. And here's the thing, when you're younger, you find some crass humor. You find stuff like Family Guy a little bit more funnier than when you get older, and you don't find that as funny anymore. But I saw Beavis and Butt-Head Do America, and it is still funny even to somebody in his mid 40s, because it's not cheap humor. It's not junk humor that can be thrown away. It's just funny stuff. Basically, Beavis and Butthead, they get mistaken for these hitmen, and they get sent out to kill this woman, but they actually think they're gonna score from this woman, and they go all across America, and federal agents are involved because there's some type of bioweapon that they're holding and they don't even know. Absolutely hilarious movie. I cannot wait till you watch it if you haven't watched it yet. If you've seen Beavis and Butthead Do America and you haven't watched it in a while and you're thinking like, oh, is that gonna hold up? It will. It's going to hold up, so watch it. Now for HBO Max, I couldn't find any new comedies that are out there that came out this month. Now remember, this is a list of all the movies that are out this month. But for now, the only thing that I have for HBO Max is Rick and Morty Season 6. I just finished it. Top form. I actually enjoyed Season 6 a little bit more than Season 5. And it's Rick and Morty. I mean, the formula hasn't really changed, but it's still in top form. It still was a great show. It's only 10 episodes, and I breezed through them pretty quickly. In 2 days, I was done with the whole thing. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was great. It's continuing on the tradition of Rick and Morty. If you're looking for something new, Season 6 is now out on HBO Max, so go watch it. We are on to sci-fi and fantasy. Now, let's start off with Netflix. I've got an easy one for you. You've probably already seen it. You've probably already seen it a million times like I have, but if you haven't, Starship Troopers. Now, Starship Troopers is a 1997 American science fiction action film directed by Paul Verhoeven. You've heard that name before. The film is actually based on a 1959 novel of the same name by Robert A. Heinlein and was written by Ed Neumeyer. And basically, the movie takes place in the 23rd century. The film follows the story of a teenager called Johnny Rico and his friends. They basically go and serve in the military for different reasons. Rico goes because his girlfriend is going and he just can't let go of her. His girlfriend is going because she actually wants to fly starships. And then his other friend is going because he actually has telepathy. There's telepathy in this movie. The movie stars Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, Neil Patrick Harris, Jake Busey, Dina Meyer, Patrick Muldoon, and the legend himself, Michael Ironside. So if you love those old movies with Michael Ironside and you've never watched Starship Troopers, what am I saying? If you love movies like RoboCop, most likely you've seen Starship Troopers already. But if there's that small fraction that hasn't seen it, you gotta watch this film. It's about those group of soldiers and they go serve, and then Earth gets attacked by this arachnid planet that they've already been going over there and trying to colonize. There's a lot of social commentary in this movie, but it is done intelligently. It's done sarcastically. Again, it's like RoboCop. Like, remember the commercials in RoboCop? Same thing here, except they showed them on the web, and then they have this thing where they're like, would you like to know more? There's a lot of government propaganda in this. So even though you're like, oh, yes, the military is awesome, you can see that there's a lot of propaganda. And it's just a very interesting movie. Very enjoyable, good action. CGI is a little dated, but you will be able to forgive it because the rest of the movie is great. So on to Hulu, and we've got here Johnny Mnemonic. Johnny Mnemonic is a 1995 cyberpunk film directed by Robert Longo. It stars Keanu Reeves, Dolph Lundgren, Ice-T, Dina Myers. It's an interesting film and it has its flaws, but I think you're going to enjoy this movie. If you haven't watched this movie and you're younger, I think you're going to enjoy this movie because all the tech is so old and all the lingo is so outdated, and some of the specs for things are so outdated that it is just laughable. When you watch this movie and you see that Keanu Reeves' character, he's basically a courier. He can store secret data in his mind, like secure portable storage, but it's inside of a person and you can only get it out with these images that only certain people have. When you see the movie and you see how much memory he has in his brain for storage capacity, you are going to laugh because it is so ridiculously low. But I think you're going to enjoy this movie because A, it's got Keanu Reeves in it. I've already recommended a movie with Keanu Reeves, and I'm going to keep recommending them because in the 80s and 90s, this man was already a legend. For all the youngins out there, you may have seen him in John Wick and be like, damn, this guy's awesome. Watch this film. This is one of the first films that started it all. And again, everything is dated. A lot of the tech is dated, a lot of the CGI, but I think you're going to enjoy it for what it is. You're going to see a lot of things from Cyberpunk in the movie because there's a lot of inspiration from that movie. So if you're a Cyberpunk fan, you should definitely see this movie because you're going to see a couple of Easter eggs where you'll say, oh, that's where they got that from. Okay, on to Amazon Prime. I had a little bit of trouble with this one because it's not a great movie, but if you haven't watched it, you got to see this film. And it is Howard the Duck. Now, Howard the Duck is a movie that stars Leah Thompson, Tim Robbins, and Jeffrey Jones. Not a fun fact about Jeffrey Jones, but did you know that he's a diddler? Oh my God, man. Nasty. Hollywood. Anyway, Howard the Duck is this weird movie about a duck who comes from a duck planet and then he gets trapped here on Earth, and then there's this other monster from another planet, and then they're fighting to get to this gigantic ray. Howard wants to use the ray to get home, and then this monster wants to use the ray to bring all his creatures here to Earth to conquer them. It is... I don't know how to explain this movie to anyone who hasn't watched it, except that there is Duck Playboy, there is Duck Boobies, there is a human woman who ends up seducing a duck. The duck ends up working at this XXX spa. I mean, it is insane what this movie has. And that's not even discussing the monster that has this gigantic tentacle that comes out of his mouth that needs more power. It is crazy. But again, you got to watch this movie so that you can say you've seen it. You got to watch it so you can be like, yeah, I watched Howard the Duck, and what in the fuck were they thinking? Either way, there's some parts that I enjoy, but I think that's member berries because I remember watching this movie when I was very young. So I got to admit that I think a lot of it is nostalgia, but you got to see this movie just to say you've seen it. Now, the final streaming service, and there's only one movie for this genre, and that is Men in Black. Again, I know that you can put this in a couple of other different genres, but I put this one under sci-fi fantasy. I picked Men in Black because it is actually a really good film that still holds up to this day. And look, I know that people hate Will Smith now, and I get it because I mean, it's embarrassing the way he has behaved lately, but you need to separate the man from the art. And the reality is that in Men in Black, he's a great actor. He really sells the role. He's funny in the movie. He's got the action chops. So yeah, I would say that if you've never watched Men in Black, definitely start with Men in Black 1, and I don't know if I could recommend Part 2 and Part 3. I like Part 2, but it's kind of bad, and Part 3 was a better made movie, but I think I had fatigue by the time that film came out, so I just was like, I don't really care for it. But Men in Black 1 has magic, still holds up, definitely watch it. We are on the last genre, which is horror, and there's not many here, so I'll make it brief. Let's start off with Netflix. We've got Dawn of the Dead, and I'm talking about the 2004 remake. Now, I know, everybody says you should watch the original Dawn of the Dead, and I agree. I've watched it, and I think that you should watch it, but I'm talking about movies that are readily accessible for you on the streaming services, and unfortunately, the original Dawn of the Dead is not available on any streaming services that I see, not for a price anyway. But the 2004 version of Dawn of the Dead, I actually enjoy more. Now, I think it's personal preference, but I just think it was a really well-made movie. This was directed by Zack Snyder. This was before the whole slow-mo thing, so don't worry. There's no slow motion in this film. You've got a great cast of Sarah Polley, Ving Rhames, Jake Reber, and Mekhi Phifer. There's some really great scenes when in the mall. The special effects are mwah. Oh, and I almost forgot. Ty Burrell, the guy from Modern Family, he's in this, and he's got a scene that's really going to change the way you look at him if you've only watched him in Modern Family. But you got to watch this film. It's really good. Great action. It's a great zombie movie. The zombies are fast-paced runners. They're like the zombies from Zombieland, and it's just an all-around great movie. And if you haven't watched Dawn of the Dead, definitely watch Dawn of the Dead 2004 on Netflix. If you're bored again and you haven't watched anything in a while, yeah, pop in Dawn of the Dead. It's pretty good. Now for Hulu, we've got a movie that I haven't watched, but it is a new movie that came out this month on their streaming service, and so I have to recommend it even though I didn't watch it, because the general consensus is that it's a pretty decent movie, and it also leads up to an entire trilogy, and it's part of the Conjuring universe, and yes, I am talking about Annabelle. So Annabelle is a 2014 American supernatural horror film directed by John Leonetti. It's actually a prequel to the 2013 film The Conjuring, which I'm actually going to recommend in a moment. And the movie is about a demonic doll. And again, I haven't watched the film, but if you like The Conjuring and you haven't watched this film, I'd say watch it, because I heard that the second movie is good. I actually haven't watched Annabelle, but I am going to watch it soon. I'm actually going to watch all of these movies on television so you can see my live reaction, and that's why I haven't watched this movie yet. Now on Amazon Prime, I have another film that I watched, but I don't remember at all. I don't know why. I don't know if I was drinking when I saw this movie, but the movie is Shutter Island, and it's the film with Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo. Basically, he's detective that's looking into the disappearance of a murderer who disappeared in this mental asylum on this island that's impenetrable, and then he digs deeper and he finds out some crazy stuff. It is a horror movie, but I think it's more of suspense slash thriller, but I think there is some horror elements to it. I definitely have to watch this movie again. I haven't seen it since the first time it came out, and again, I don't know if I was drinking during that time, but I don't remember any of it, so I'll definitely have to put that on my list of movies to watch again and maybe give a little review on it. So moving on, finally, to the last recommendation of the last genre, and that is HBO Max, The Conjuring. Now, I've seen The Conjuring. I haven't watched it again. I've only watched it once. I watched it in the theater. Pretty scary, well-made movie. The movie is directed by James Wan, and it stars Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. They're paranormal investigators and authors, and they go to places and they try to either prove that that something is there or something is not. That's really the bare bones of it, because I don't want to give anything away if you haven't watched this film. I think you should just go into it blind, so that way you really get the scares of it. I just don't think with horror movies you should spoil yourself on it, and I'm guilty of spoiling movies myself, specifically with comic book movies. If I'm not going to watch a movie in the theater, I'll just watch a review on YouTube because I just don't care about those movies. But I think with horror movies, you should definitely stay away from as much as you can, because if it's a good horror movie, it's really just going to capture you. It's going to scare you. I would say that the last film that genuinely scared me was Hereditary. And I watched the movie a bit late, but when I saw the film, I went into it blind, even though I heard rave reviews about it. And wow, it is a slow burn of a movie, but that movie will blow you away. I believe Hereditary is on HBO Max, but I'll correct myself below if it's not. Again, I didn't recommend the film now because it wasn't a new film that was put into the streaming service this month, but it'll be on a future video when I recommend more films for you. So that is it for me today. I hope that these movie recommendations are to your liking. Again, these are movies for the Gen X generation or the younger generation that wants to experience what it's like to be a Gen X. Thank you so much for listening. I've got much more content. I've got much more recommendations. So hit that like, hit the subscribe, hit that notification, and you will get the 1st and 15th of every month new recommendations for movies for guys like me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and you all have a lovely evening.